Lucky 13 KIOT, Barstow, the High Desert's Total Radio 24 hours a day. That was Lionel Richie, and now here's the latest from Whitney Houston on Lucky 13.
Politics. They seem to work into everything, don't they? I'm not overly political, and I make it an unsaid rule to more or less stay away from it on the show, but today, as this pandemic rolls on, politics have, they've definitely begun to creep in. And actually, they haven't crept in, they just stormed onto the stage and they've begun doing their dirty work. I mean, maybe 2 weeks ago it was like, this is nonpartisan, let's work together, the virus doesn't care what party you belong to, but now it's nothing but conspiracy theories and pandemics are a tool of voter suppression. Not to mention what governor didn't have an appropriate response and fingers just pointing galore. I guess that's the world we live in. But what about flying? There's a bit of a debate going, and it's actually kind of raging, but it's something we've all probably had to deal with at this point. To fly or not to fly? That's the question. And the question is summed up perfectly with this email from friend and patron Delta Sierra. He says, "Hey Brandon, I listened to the early available copy of your latest edition on Patreon, and I usually wait till my podcasts are available for download, but I was really excited to hear your new release, and I agree 100% with what you and Dr. Fine had to say. We went through a great deal of thought about our particular situation, both legally and morally, which led us to fly 10 days ago, and we're planning to do so again later this week. I'm not sure what the situation is for most of the trainer fleet, the 172s you referenced, but if our plane goes longer than about 15 days without being flown, then it needs to go through a manufacturer-mandated process of mothballing and then a substantive refurbishment process before it returns to airworthiness before it can be flown again." They're talking about a Phenom 300, by the way. "We returned from New York City on Friday, March 13th, just before things got really scary there, and we put ourselves into near lockdown 2 days before the Bay Area made it mandatory. But after 2 weeks and much careful consideration and seeking advice from friends both in the aviation and medical communities, we decided we could both safely and ethically take the airplane out for a flight and keep it from becoming unairworthy. We drove to the FBO at San Jose. We walked through the wide open space at the FBO saying hi to the staff from about 15 feet distance. We walked onto the ramp with no one else around, did our pre-flight, closed up the plane, at which point one of the ramp guys came out for our engine start and departure, and we took off. We did a short flight to Camarillo, taxied back without opening the plane, and then flew back home. We left the plane on the ramp with instructions to hangar it while we did not come near any staff on the ramp or when we walked back through the FBO to our car. I do think the need to keep the plane airworthy is sufficient to consider how to do it safely. Unlike a rental plane, we're the only ones in it, so no issues of transmission between pilot users, and the only part that someone else would touch are the latches to the single-point fueling panel, which I popped open with a Kleenex and then sanitized my hands afterward, and the torque link for the front nose gear. Same protocol. Our local flight club is permitting solo-only flights limited to 1 per aircraft per day to allow for post-flight cleaning. But I think we, flying as a crew of 2 type-rated pilots, are much safer with both of us in the cockpit, especially as there was some weather in the San Jose area that day. Interestingly, there was enough traffic into San Jose that we had a bit of a delay waiting for our release at Camarillo, but that was probably largely due to the cumulonimbus in the vicinity of San Jose that required threading individual flights around the cells moving through. Bottom line, I think what we did was both ethical and rational. But while we tried to think it through from many perspectives, we'd both be interested in whether you have additional considerations to add. On top of that, all of Phil's recurrency training at CAE is scheduled for early June, and the notion of getting into a close quarantine sim with an instructor/examiner touching the equipment there is giving us serious concerns about how to remain both current and competent. Wishing you all the best, and same to your colleagues at the Delta Sierra." Well, I emailed him right back, and I said, "I think you guys thought it out well. It seems you considered all the elements with respect to contamination and transmission both ways, and you made a really rational decision. Probably little to no risk to yourselves or any workers at the FBO. Plus, after this much time, it's likely you're both negative anyway. Glad to hear you got out of New York City in time. As I watch the news, I can't believe that something like this is really happening. It's just gut-wrenching to watch what's happening there. And as for the sim in June, I don't know what the future holds, but that's sounding sketchier by the day. It'll be quite a dilemma as the day approaches, but for now, maybe we can hold out hope that there will be some sort of breakthrough between now and then. Also, it puzzles me to think that as you and I sit here pondering this as an ethical dilemma, so many others are just hopping in a 172 that's been flown 5 times already that day and pretending it's okay. Anyway, have a great flight this week. Bravo Golf. So at the same time that he's having an ethical dilemma, I show up to work and it really seems like he's the only one because at my airport, it's pretty much business as usual, unfortunately. On a short break at work, I was scrolling through Instagram and I saw a post that really struck a chord with me. It's by AeroPro LLC, which is the company of a great fan of the show who you've probably heard more than once reading the post-show disclaimer in a really great radio voice. He's a seasoned radio pro, and it's no surprise because he's Chris Dunn, the flying weatherman. He's got a unique perspective on things, and I've been looking for a good time to get him on the show. I think this is it. Here's what he wrote in that post. From AeroPro LLC, our Cessna 172 is getting some rest during this coronavirus downtime. Teaching people to fly is not a good practice during this time of social distancing, but we'll be back in the air as soon as we can safely do so. Well, I thought that summed it up pretty well, right? Short, sweet, to the point. But there's obviously a lot of thought that goes into shutting down an entire business for an indefinite period of time. It's a decision nobody wants to make, but something that many have been forced to do. I wanted to hear more about what it's like in different parts of the country and what it's like to be on the responsible yet devastating side of things. So we decided to talk about it. Remotely, of course. All right, Chris Dunn, the flying weatherman, welcome to Podcasting on a Plane. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Brandon. Great to be here.
You know, I've been looking for a reason to have you on the show for a little bit now, and obviously listeners are familiar, and now that you've said that, they probably recognize your voice from all the wonderful disclaimers that I've put at the end of a couple different episodes there that you've sent me. I appreciate that. And you have quite a radio voice, and you're getting an Instagram presence with your flight school and so on, but you've got a lot to you. So tell us about what you're all about and kind of give me your resume here, because you've got aviation from a lot of different angles, don't you?
Yeah, well, in addition to the voiceover stuff and podcasting on a plane, I've been a broadcast meteorologist for 29 years, and I recently left that profession to go into aviation training full-time. I've been a CFI for about a year. I work at AeroPro, which is a flight training school and Part 145 maintenance facility in Gulf Shores, Alabama. And I've been a CFI for about a year, but I've been flying for about 23 years now. I did my private pilot in South Florida in 1997, followed up with an instrument rating in 1999. I've flown in and worked in Utah, Philadelphia, Denver, Phoenix, and now I'm stationed down here along the Gulf Coast in Gulf Shores, Alabama. So I've been able to combine the love of aviation with my love of weather and appreciation for weather. And I've also taught aviation meteorology on the college level, but now I'm able to teach that to my students on a firsthand basis, and hopefully I can get across to them, because basically what I was doing as a broadcast meteorologist is I was teaching people about weather every single night. Now it's down to the level of where they can really use it. And, you know, what I like to say is every time we take to the sky, we have a front row seat to the weather, and it's so important to understand it and also to respect it.
That's amazing. You really have weather down from every angle, and I wish that I could have it that much, but all pilots, I think, are affected so much by this, but we don't get that in-depth training from true meteorologists all the time. So I feel like your students probably have such an advantage learning from someone like you. So tell me a little bit about the flight school where you teach.
Well, being down here on the Gulf Coast, we do have the advantage of having a lot of different types of weather. We have a pretty wide variety, with the exception of snow, but we did get snow one time a couple of years ago. So we do occasionally get that as well. Down here on the Gulf Coast, we're at Jack Edwards National Airport in Gulf Shores, Alabama. We're AeroPro, and it's actually the third busiest airport in the state of Alabama. It does not have a control tower, but we have been approved by the FAA to get a control tower at the end of the year. So by January of 2021, we'll now be in the NAS as an air traffic control facility with a control tower, and going from the freedom of Class Golf to Class Delta surface area with a control tower, and a lot of people coming and going. We have everything from gyrocopters to G4s and G5s and Challenger jets and everything else in between. A lot of flight training going on, and we have a lot of primary students, some commercial students, Cessna 172. We see a lot of those around here, Piper Warriors, and everything in between.
What was it like at your flight school right before all this happened?
We're still trying to get our footing. My main job is to not only instruct students, but also to help the marketing and create awareness and let people know that we're here. We have actually a pilot shop, which is kind of a dying breed. So we have a pilot shop, we have the maintenance facility, We hosted recently an AOPA Rusty Pilot seminar that was really well attended. And so the awareness was getting out there, and I really started to see the momentum building. And then all came to a crashing halt when we encountered the COVID-19 coronavirus. Now, a little background on me. Back in September, I ended my television stretch, my television career, at least for the time being. My contract was up, so I had the opportunity to go full time at the flight school, which was still a fairly new operation. So they brought me on full time at the end of September of last year. CFI is part of my job description. I'm also my official title is Senior Project Manager. So I am responsible for the marketing and promotion of the flight school, any decisions regarding curriculum, trying to develop a plan for 141 certification. We're still fairly new, and there wasn't really done at all anything at all with the flight school until I got there. We have one training airplane. We have a 1954 Piper Apache that's still in pieces. That's been that way for about a year. And we have a 310 that's a basket case, so those don't really count. So we have a standard plain vanilla 172 November model, and that's what we do all of our primary training in. Don't have a ton of students because we are still a new school, and we do have some competition. We don't have a huge population down here either, so it's not like we have, of the 3 million people that live in this metro area, you're going to get a bunch that are just going to come banging down the door and say, I want flight training. Here I am. Just get a little trickle. There is the Navy training that does go on out with civilian contractors, but we're not a part of that because we're still fairly new, and the other flight schools in the area have been doing that for a while. So while they're busy and they're flying the wings off their airplanes, we're sitting in the office looking out over the ramp saying, I wish we could do something here. Got to get it going. That's the most frustrating part of my job, is trying to start up a new operation, not really having the resources or the people to accommodate a lot of training, and not having a lot of people ready and raring to go for flight training around here. So it's not like Miami or Phoenix or San Diego. It's South Alabama, where we have Gulf Shores is a population of about 12,000. I think Foley is about 20,000, and Orange Beach is about 7,000. So maybe a core population within 25 miles is maybe 50,000 people. Not a lot.
Huh, okay. Yeah, it's interesting. And, to get that going, and then, of course, now this hits, so, forget it, but...
Yeah. We started to see some traction, a lot more visitors to the website. We had zero visibility when I started. We didn't have an Instagram account. We had 5 followers on the Facebook page. We weren't on Yelp. We weren't on Google My Business. We weren't on Google Maps. We weren't on AirNav or FlightAware or ForeFlight, any of those places where people would look. So we've established that, and we started to build a little momentum. We had an AOPA Rusty Pilot seminar in January. We had 30 people. So that was actually a tremendous turnout, much bigger than I thought it was going to be. But then, as we start to get some momentum, kind of the balloon was popped with all of this stuff happening. But we're not the only ones.
Yeah, it's, almost everyone. But I guess that's kind of what we're here to talk about today then is, if you just want to get right into it, why is it that so many flight schools are deciding to do the right thing and not be operational, and then so many other flight schools have decided to, hey, forget it, let's slap a mask on or not or just whatever, but we got your money, keep flying, right? Seems to be the attitude. So your school then is very small and new, and I guess it's easy to shut down an operation that isn't that operational in the first place. But what's it like, and why did you guys make the choice to cease operations instead of trying to ramp up in a time like this?
Well, I was originally given the task of doing an analysis and what was going on across the country, what the experts were saying. And after I delivered that, they pretty much had already made the decision to shut it down. And that was back in the middle of March. So we were early on making that determination that it would be in the best interest of our school and to prevent the spread of the coronavirus in our community to shut it down. Now, we do have the advantage of we are fairly small. We have a fairly small staff, and we are a pretty well diversified company. So we were in a position to weather this storm. But boy, for the long haul, it's going to be tough for a lot of people. And, it's not just aviation. Many different sectors are affected by these closures. I work in Gulf Shores, Alabama, where tourism is a huge thing. We've had so many closures of restaurants, of resorts, cancellations for spring break. And now we're coming up on the summer season. There's a huge music event called the Hangout Music Fest. That was canceled. So portion of what we're seeing, that's across the entire country. And I think the decision was not made lightly to close down our flight school. We carefully considered the risks and the alternatives, and being cooped up in a 172 with a bunch of strangers, rotating through, even wearing masks. The experts caution us that wearing a mask does not substitute social distancing. So we decided it was in our best interest to close it down. And they said May 15th at the earliest was when we would come back up and running.
Now, what is the governor of your state saying? Because obviously there's a wide range of attitudes between the states. I mean, California, here where I'm at, got on it early. It was, shut it down. We're done. We'll see what happens at Easter. It's probably going to go to May. And that's where we are now. But there are a lot of other states that are, I think at this point, finally there. But up until maybe even as recently as last week, there wasn't even a social distancing order. It was that's something you should probably do, but we'll implement that if we have to. How has Alabama been specifically as a state?
Well, specifically, the governor of Alabama mentioned California, and she said, "We are not California. We are not New York. We're not going to close it down." I think it was about a week later where she changed her mind, Governor Kay Ivey of Alabama, and we were one of the last states to impose these restrictions, and said, it's probably a good idea that we shut things down. And the way that this virus seems to have come across the country is the ports of entry around the edges, New York, California, Seattle, Miami, and it's working its way across the country. So Alabama wasn't really the recipient of a lot of these cases at first, but we have certainly seen it grow. And as more and more tests get out there and more people are tested, I think we're finding that the spread is continuing, and eventually the states that are enacting these restrictions, which I believe it's all 50 states now, are realizing that, we got to do whatever we can to prevent the spread of this thing. And specifically for aviation, I think that kind of comes under the heading of aeronautical decision-making in a way, because we have to weigh the risks and the options and alternatives and make the best choice depending on what we're seeing at that given time.
Of course. So when you're sitting there listening to your governor saying things like that, and you're in the midst of shutting down a flight school, what's going through your head? What are you thinking?
Well, we would certainly like the government to be behind what we're doing, but, we're going with the best available information that we have, and we're analyzing everything and making that determination. And we have determined that it is in our best interest, despite what the civic leaders and government leaders have been telling the rest of the state, that we're not going to shut it down. We're making our own determination. And we're saying that we think it is in our best interest and the best interest of the community to shut it down for now. And we're going to take a hit, and it's certainly bad for business. But eventually, we saw the way it was going to go eventually. And so the consensus was that, everything is going to be shut down anyway, so we might as well be proactive about it.
Sure. Now, what would you say to other flight schools that are not taking that same attitude, that are kind of just continuing to go, whether it's through, quote unquote, enhanced cleaning procedures, which, I don't know, that might just be lip service. Maybe they're really doing it. I don't know, or slap on a mask and fly. But what would you say to those schools that are continuing to operate and have not done as you have?
Well, it's kind of tough to look at that, because when you do the right thing, or when you do what you think is the right thing, but you see others that are technically, they're legally allowed to do that, but they're doing something else that may be counter to what you're doing or trying to achieve, it is frustrating. And, they may say, well, we have enhanced cleaning procedures and we're wiping down the airplane after every flight and we're wearing masks. That may not be enough. I have to admit, Brandon, I was one of those in the beginning where I was a little bit skeptical. I didn't really think that this was going to be that big of a deal. And I just wanted to kind of wait and see what was going to happen because we've had scares in the past. But as it became more and more apparent how transmissible this virus is and how quickly it spread, and not necessarily the fatalities, but how many people have been contracting this and how quickly it spread across the country. It's frustrating to see that not everybody is taking the same precautions that we are, not only as a company but also family. We've been kind of stuck at home, and we're doing our best to try to do what we can to limit our contact with other people. And when we're out in public, have to go to the store, I wear a mask.
Yeah. So when it comes time, whatever that time may be, to reopen, what is your plan or what's your criteria for bringing everything back online?
At this point, I don't know. I think that's the big unknown. The great question we have in front of us right now is, how are we going to start things back up again? Because it was fairly easy for us to make that determination to close things down. We'll just shut it down. We'll wipe everything down and we'll close the door. We'll put a note on the door and we'll do the right thing. When to bring it back, that is the really big decision that has to be made. And I'm not exactly sure how we're going to do that. I think we're just going to kind of play it by ear and go with the guidance of science, the medical experts, as well as government regulations, what they allow us to do, what they won't allow us to do. And so we're going to make a well-informed decision. Now, on the subject of other flight schools or other training operations that are still going on, I get it that there are some segments of the training industry that are essential, such as recurrent training for Part 135 and Part 121 operations. The airlines, they still need to have current pilots. Military, obviously, air ambulance operations. But, when we're talking about the average recreational flyer that wants to come in for a flight review, or I want to work on my private pilot rating because I want to buy a 172 and I want to be able to fly around, you can put that off for a few months. And that type of an operation, I just don't think that that's essential.
Sure.
I have a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. There have been a lot of discussions online that I've seen about how some pilots aren't flying because they don't want to bog down the ATC system, yet others are flying around and they have the feedback that ATC seems like they're bored and they welcome the conversation when an airplane flies through their airspace with the lighter flow of air traffic. What have you been experiencing? And I guess it's a little bit different being a tower controller versus maybe an approach or a center controller.
Sure. Everywhere is different. And obviously, I can only speak to my own experience here and it's my opinion. But at my specific tower, and maybe this is why I keep kind of bringing this up on the podcast, but my airport is almost business as usual when it comes to a sunny day. And it's crazy to me because, I realize that everybody has to operate and fly and do their thing. And we're home to two large flight schools. One is a national chain of flight schools. One is a one-off, but that's done very well for themselves. And then also two very large flying clubs. So our airport is alive and well with general aviation. Plus, of course, we have three huge jet centers, including an Atlantic. So we have jets galore as well. And a couple of large companies that are based here in Southern California have their fleets of Gulfstreams and so on also based there. So they have shut down. Mostly the jet operators are not doing a whole lot of operating. But when it comes to the GA side of things and the training and so forth, you would be amazed at how quickly, sometimes even before I get there to open in the morning, there is somebody or maybe many somebodies in the traffic pattern just doing touch and goes, right? And for us in air traffic, it depends on, I guess, where you're at. So if you're at a predominantly airline type of airport, well, obviously that traffic is down, much less, much decreased. And it's not, I'm not going to say it's easy, but I said before that it was predictable to sort of lower your staffing with that predictable decrease in traffic. Now, at my airport, that's not the case because we never really know. I think there's probably at least a group text that goes out at one of the flight schools about, hey, it's sunny, get in the plane right now and do your pattern work. Because I had to sequence somebody number 8 the other day for the runway, and I had 6 departures waiting to take off, and we're in the middle of a government shutdown. And I can't really reconcile that, because what I don't think that they understand is that we're sitting there operating with 2 people in the building. So we could be upstairs for hours at a time, and that's completely fine with me, except that when you're getting just pummeled with pattern work, it's not funny. And it's hard for me to believe that in the midst of, social distancing and in a governor's order to stay shut down, despite the fact that, yes, I realize legally flight schools are considered essential, that we're having to work that hard. And there could be 2 of us in the building up there for 4-hour stints at a time. So if we are under that degree of workload for what I would at least personally deem to be completely non-essential operations, it's pretty frustrating. Now, if I was somewhere else where the traffic was down, yeah, it might be nice to have someone to talk to or whatever. But at our specific airport, you probably, once you set foot on the airport, wouldn't know that the rest of the town or the rest of the city of San Diego is a ghost town right now.
Well, it's kind of surprising to hear.
Yeah, it is. And it's really surprising when you get there and see it for yourself, because, I realize that a lot of the employees are hourly, and I realize that a lot of the students have probably prepaid or they're on some sort of loan for this, and they probably quit their jobs, or maybe they didn't have one because they're just fresh out of college or whatever to do this. So I understand that there's an incentive to keep going. And I understand that you would, if you don't go, you don't get paid, or if you don't fly, you don't progress or whatever. But at the same time, this is a thing that doesn't care where you are in your career, how much you make, where you go, what you do, what nationality you are. I mean, it doesn't care. It's a virus. And unfortunately, as the system, which I'm on the side of, that tries to run it, is down to a skeleton crew so that we can try to prevent transmission between employees that are cooped up in a close area, the decisions of other people are really affecting that. And, I can't be upstairs by myself if I have 7 people in the pattern. I can't do it. So then I have to have somebody else up there who's right next to me talking and all those things that transmits the virus. And I actually feel like my risk level goes up so that somebody can do their pattern work. And to me, I'm having a really difficult time reconciling that is essential in any way, because, let's face it, there's no airline job at the end of this thing for anybody. I mean, the industry is in a downturn that we've never seen before. Hopefully it'll pick up quicker than it did after some of the other downturns we've had over the last, 20, 30 years. But in this case, even if you finish your commercial and your multi-engine this week, or your CFI or whatever it is, there's no job.
I think it comes back to 2 things. One is the aeronautical decision making, where we have sometimes you have a threat that is easily seen, such as a towering cumulonimbus cloud in front of you. Oh, I'm not going to fly through that thunderstorm. That would be really stupid. I'm going to fly around it. This is a threat that is not seen, and it may not impact you at all, but it may impact you in a big way. I have a family member who did contract COVID-19. She's 79 years old and spent 2 weeks on a ventilator and intubated in the ICU. And fortunately, she started to recover and got better. But I'm thinking in the back of my mind, what if I got it and I was asymptomatic? I thought I was perfectly fine, but then I passed it along to someone else, who then passes it along to someone else, and so on and so forth. So it's not just about you. I think, it's no secret that CFIs don't make a ton of money, and it's tough to tell someone who's not already making a whole lot of money that, no, you can't make any money now because we're going to ground everything. Just like the multitude of restaurant servers, they don't make a whole lot of money either, and they're certainly not making a whole lot of tips when they're out of work. So it's not just aviation, it's a lot of other sectors. And I think a lot of people are doing their parts, and the least that we could do is try to do our parts to make this go away. The more we do, the quicker that is going to happen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's really all this comes down to. And I realize it sucks for everybody. It really does. But at the same time, we're all in this one together. This isn't a political thing. It's not anything else. I mean, the entire world is dealing with this right now. And if we can not just flatten the curve, but stamp this thing out, get a vaccine, and move on with our lives. That's really the way we're going to come out of it. But until then, we've all got to be responsible and do the right thing.
The thing that struck me the most, Brandon, is how quickly this turned around. I last flew on a commercial jet back to Las Vegas in the middle of February for the annual conference of the Flight School Association of North America. That was on February 20th, 21st. The streets of Las Vegas were packed. The airplane was packed. I saw a few people wearing masks in the airport, but this thing really hadn't reared its ugly head just yet. And in about a month's time, we started seeing restrictions coming down. We started seeing things start to close. We started to see airlines scaling back. In fact, at that conference in the middle of February, we still had the recruiters from the regional airlines saying, please send us as many pilots as you can because we're still recruiting. We still need more pilots. We have open spots on our classes. About a month and a half later, I think just about every regional airline said, no, we're closing all of our classes for the rest of the year. We're not hiring anybody else. We don't need anybody. We're scaling back. And how things turned around so quickly. It went from full steam ahead to post 9/11 and then some. To those who are contemplating an airline career or a career path in aviation, all I can say is the future at any point is really uncertain. A year ago, the world was your oyster. Now it looks like it's pretty grim, but give it another 18 months, 24 months, and things can really turn around if things go the way we hope they will go.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, once there's a vaccine for this, we're probably going to go back to pretty much business as usual. And, my comments here are not to try to, I mean, I've been a CFI for more than 20 years now. So, I mean, I get it. I mean, it's hard to not fly. It's hard to not progress your career. It's hard to not make any money. And there are some people who have no safety net. And that's a huge bummer. I know there's stimulus checks supposedly on their way, but I mean, let's face it, it's probably not enough money to get very far. But, when I say all these things, I'm not trying to disparage any particular school or any particular anything. I mean, I get that things are tough all around, but, it's just a time that people need to make the right decision. And, we'll call that, like you said, aeronautical decision making. It's a threat that's harder to see, but we need to do the right thing. And, I appreciate that you've chosen to do that. I've talked with Max Trescott a lot of times about this. He chose to do it way before it was the en vogue thing to do. And there are several flight schools that I've read about in AOPA and flying and things like that they did this early. They decided, hey, we're not gonna spread this. But at the same time, I mean, I understand that people need to progress in their careers, and there will be a job for them someday. It's just going to be a while, but hopefully this will be a quicker return to normal than the last few downturns that we've had.
I'm not here to pass judgment on anybody who chooses to continue flying, especially if they're flying solo. That's fine. You're not in contact with anybody, and there's no problem with that. It's just when you're training other people and then they're out in the world and exposing themselves to other people, and that's how the virus spreads. It's from person to person. And if we don't have a lot of contact between a lot of different people, then that's how the spread is slowed or even stopped. So, we do have the freedom of choice, and we do have the option of continuing flight training in many areas, because if it is deemed as an essential activity, then there's no restriction or prohibition against it. But I would just hope that those who are still flying that are taking extra precautions, not just the proper precautions, but extra above and beyond precautions to try to slow or stop the spread of this virus.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, let's get a little bit lighter here. What was it like for you to transition into flying from being into weather, or did weather get you interested in the atmosphere and that's what got you into flying, or how did that all go?
Do you have 15 hours?
Yeah, sure. I got nowhere to go.
My grandfather was a pilot. He got his pilot certificate in 1929. He graduated from Oceanside High School in Oceanside, California, did all of his flight training in California. My father was a pilot, so he kind of followed in his footsteps. He did all of his training in the Bay Area, Northern California. And my uncle was also a pilot. I guess I kind of fell into it because I'd been surrounded by it. But my father got out of flying when I was about 7 or 8 years old. So it's not like I grew up in the co-pilot seat of his various airplanes that he had. It wasn't until I was about 30 that I got back into flying. But I was always interested in weather, and I guess since the two go hand in hand, it was kind of natural that I combined the two. And funny thing is, on my private pilot, instrument pilot, commercial pilot, and even my CFI check ride, I wasn't really asked very many questions at all about weather. I guess it was probably assumed that I probably know as much, if not maybe more, than the examiner. So I'll just leave that alone, and we'll work on some other stuff and maybe find some other holes in my knowledge and abilities. But when it comes to weather, obviously that's a very important factor in flying. And when it comes to IFR flying, I would argue that weather is even more important than VFR decision making because the go no go decision at VFR, it's okay. Well, we can't go. The ceilings are 700 feet, or the visibility is 2 miles, and that's it. When you're flying IFR, sure, there's nothing to stop you under Part 91 to do a 0-0 takeoff or to fly in really bad, nasty weather. But should you? And always leaving yourself an out or two or three or four outs. I'm, really a proponent of safety and paying close attention to the weather and be respectful of the weather because I'm not only a pilot, but I also worked for a number of years out on the ocean on sport fishing boats. And so the weather can do a number on you out there on the water as well. So if you're on the water, if you're in the air, pay close attention to the weather and respect the weather because the weather can do bad things to you if you're not paying attention.
Sure. It's funny because weather, when it comes to teaching flying, is some people's favorite part. But I would say most people, it's probably their least favorite part of learning to fly, particularly like you said, for instrument pilots. It's just one of those things where it's a lot of theory. It's kind of hard to get a straight answer on any particular thing. Plus, don't even get me started on decoding weather reports and forecasts and things like that. But unfortunately, I think it gets a little bit of a bum rap when it's actually one of the most important things to your flight. What advice would you have for somebody who isn't particularly keen on the weather side of things, but that really wants to be a good instrument pilot?
Well, I would tell them that what I would tell everybody when I was working as a broadcast meteorologist, that weather impacts every single person every single day, whether you realize it or not. And as an IFR pilot, it has a great impact on where you can fly, how you can fly, and what you're flying, and where you're going, and your route planning, and your decision making, your ADM, everything. It all starts with weather. When you're planning out a flight, the first thing you're going to consider is weather and route, how that's going to affect your route of flight. And meteorology and aviation meteorology, it's really a whole subject in and of itself. So I think that may be a little intimidating for some people. They just say, I want to fly the airplane. I don't want to have to study all this other stuff about weather and aerodynamics and navigation and VORs. What? VORs? That's crazy. But when you study weather, it really is important because it is applicable. Now, I remember flying when I lived in Phoenix, Arizona. We would go 2-3 weeks without even seeing a cloud. So it's hard to really relay some weather theory without actually having to experience it. Other parts of the country, icing is a real threat. Thunderstorms, it's a daily occurrence. Sea breeze front, low overcast, all of that stuff you'll encounter on a daily or weekly basis. So I think being able to actually experience the weather and IFR training to be in the weather and get some actual time, there's no substitute for actually flying in the clouds versus flying under the hood or under the foggles or on a sim. Doing it for the real thing and being in the actual clouds, that was pardon the expression, but an eye-opening experience for me the first time I ever did it. And I'll never forget that. And also the first time you do it, you'll probably never forget that either.
So do you enjoy teaching weather when you're a CFI? Is that your favorite part to teach, or do you like to teach the other stuff too?
I think everything. I love aviation. I love flying. I like teaching just the basics, just getting a first-time student or second or third-time student up there and seeing the light bulb going off and showing them how to do a basic maneuver. And then the next time they remember what I taught them. And that's almost as satisfying and gratifying for me as it is for them. Like, I don't have to remind them that on the ground, we're steering with our feet, not with a yoke. Or, when you level out, okay, we're going to start building up speed. So you need to trim off some of those control pressures, or, some of those things that when you fly for a while, you don't even think of. They're subconscious things that you just normally do. You take for granted. But when they start to get that, and when they start to, when you transition from you're doing everything, they're doing nothing, to them doing everything and you're doing nothing, I think that's the greatest part about teaching someone to fly.
Yeah, I agree with you on that for sure. And I think I speak for all of us when I say I can't wait till the day that we can get back to doing that.
Amen, brother.
Well, with all that stuff that maybe we shouldn't be doing, I thought I'd come up with a list of stuff that's aviation related that you should be doing, or that other people are doing that's actually helping out. From AIN Online, Safe Flight Instruments has developed a device that enables a single ventilator to be used by up to 4 patients simultaneously. The prototype is undergoing approval under the emergency use authorization for use by hospitals. They're calling it the Quad Vent Splitter, and the device was developed by Michael Lambton, a mechanical design engineer for the manufacturer of aviation safety and flight performance systems. They say that using 3D printing, the product is designed with 4 independent ports that can be stopped using tethered splitter plugs, permitting a 2-, 3-, or 4-way configuration. Safe Flight said pending EUA approval, it'll deliver the products to hospitals that have been participating in trials of it and make the design available under license to companies with more extensive additive manufacturing capabilities. The hope is that the quad vent splitter can compensate for the lack of availability of ventilators that are being used to treat patients during the pandemic. Lambton came up with the design after speaking with a relative who is a medical professional working on the front lines of the crisis. Quote, having both the technical ability and support from Safe Flight made me feel as though it was my obligation to contribute in any way I could, he said. The company's ability to rapidly reconfigure its people and processes to tackle this dynamic problem has been nothing short of inspiring. Again, that article from AIN Online. And from WFTV.com in Daytona Beach, Embry-Riddle is helping healthcare workers by responding to the coronavirus pandemic by building thousands of face masks and face shields. Officials said 50 Embry-Riddle students will produce 5,000 face shields and distribute them between Halifax Health and Advent Health hospitals. In a tweet, Embry-Riddle University says teams at both of Embry-Riddle's residential campuses in Daytona and Prescott are fabricating high-quality masks and face shields to help protect healthcare workers amid the novel coronavirus outbreak. Go Eagles. Well, my hat's off to both of them for doing what they can to help out. And while the rest of us are stuck at home, I wanted to give you a list of a couple things you can do that might really help you pass the time. If you're a full-time CFI, one thing that always comes up every couple of years is your CFI online renewal. Sporties is offering a free online renewal, which I think is pretty cool. And it looks like they just charge $24.95 for the online ACR processing fee. AOPA made up a really nice list of what all the aviation museums across the country are doing online to help out kids who are now on one form of homeschooling or another. And one of the best parts is that it includes what the Kalamazoo Air Zoo, one of my all-time favorites, is doing. And of course, the link is in the show notes. And lastly, don't forget about the Plain English ATC Sim. You can get 10% off using the discount code DELTA, as in the West Coast Delta, because if you can't talk to a real controller today, well, there's a pretty good AI one in your pocket, right on your phone. And until that next time that you and I get to talk, your frequency change is approved and report back on this frequency for the next episode. And most importantly, stay safe and please, stay healthy. Good day.
I'm Chris Dunn from theflyingweatherman.com. The Podcasting on a Plane podcast is presented for entertainment purposes only. Brendan's comments and those of his guests, the website's content, and any of the social media, etc. are not part of his official responsibility as a controller or as an FAA employee. The views and opinions you hear on the podcast are his and those of his guests, and not necessarily that of the FAA. There is no nexus between Podcasting on a Plane and the FAA. Also, while he's a CFI, he's not acting as your CFI. Nor is he your mechanic, your doctor, your shrink, or your spouse. This podcast is presented for entertainment, camaraderie, and fun, but is in no way, shape, or form professional advice or legal counsel. If you're in need of professional advice, get some from somewhere more appropriate than a podcast, no matter how good this one may be.